Okay, I'll do it then. Okay, my name is Fernanda Liberali. I am a professor and researcher at PUC São Paulo. PUC is the Catholic University of São Paulo. This university is the same as the one that Paulo Freire used to work at the end of his life. And it's a university that is marked by a very revolutionary attitude towards theory, towards practice, towards actions in reality. So it's a very important place to work for me. I am an applied linguist. I studied languages as in my graduation, undergraduate studies. Then I took my master in applied linguistics and language studies, and also my doctoral degree. After that, I started working at PUC as well, and working with the Applied Linguistic Department. And nowadays I am both at the Applied Linguistic Department and also at the Educational Program, which is interesting because both places I work with mainly with teacher education, and but always looking at how language embodies the activities of the school, and so how we can understand what's going on, and mainly how we can transform what's happening in schools through an analysis of the discourse that materializes what happens in school. And when I say discourse, I mean both linguistic, verbal, and non-verbal discourse. So that's me. Well, I am also an activist and very engaged with political issues all over the country, with political parties and any kind of situation that is happening in the country. I'm always involved with them. Just
Monica.
So, my name is Monica Lemos. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Helsinki. But I started studying Vygotsky and my researcher career with Fernanda. So I have to say, Andy, that this is very special to us because we've been working together for over 20 years, but I don't think we have ever talked together about the work we do in the group, right? In a place like this, like in an interview.
Yeah, not about this, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah, we've done many things together, but not talking about the group the way you invited us to. So thank you very much for that. This is very special. So I met Fernanda like 20 years ago. I was an undergrad student the second year, and she was an English, I think she was starting at PUC as well as the Catholic University. And then I became an undergrad researcher. And after I did the master degree in the Applied Linguistics program with Fernanda. It was a project we were starting working in the outskirts of São Paulo, and involved literacy. And at that time, the city we were working at was the second most violent city in São Paulo. So we had our struggles there. Then we started another project. I'm already getting to the project because everything is connected, okay, Andy? Then we started working with another project called Learning and Playing that involved, it was on the opposite side of the city. And we started working with teachers, early childhood education. And after that, we expanded a little bit more for other parts of the city with also early childhood educators and managers. And then that's when I started my PhD with Fernanda, Irio, and Professor Hanna Toivianen, who is now in Tampere University. And personally, I also met my husband in one of
my class.
So you can see everything is connected.
I was a Cupid, actually.
So it was a course on argumentation. Both of us did very bad during that semester. And then I met my husband, and yes, So this is me. Now I work as a PhD. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Helsinki. I work as a pedagogical coordinator at a private school in São Paulo. I'm also involved in a number of research groups and Vygotsky study groups. And I'll also work with Professor Rodolfo Vilela and Hildeberto Muniz from Unesp and São Paulo University on working accident prevention. I talk to them, we study together with their groups, and they have a partnership with the ergonomy group from Iviclo. I'm also involved in a number of social groups, social helpers somehow, here in the neighborhood I live, and with friends that we donate food, we prepare food, we donate clothes, this type of stuff. Somehow is an activism not as strong as our research group does, but yes. So I think this is it about me so far.
It's amazing. When I go to Fernanda's Padlet page, there's a link that goes to this page for your group that you've already referred to, and I see pages and pages of these different projects and seminars every 2 weeks with people speaking to this group. And from what you've said so far, you communicate this amazing intensity of activity. So let's start by tell me about this group. Who are they? What unites them? And what range of activity are you all involved in together?
Well, it's a group that initiated before it became a group officially. It's funny because in Brazil, the research groups were officially initiated in 2004 as a demand from the financing agencies. And so in 2004, we created what is now called the Language and Activity in the School Context, which is our group, LACE, or LACE, if you prefer. It's LACE. This group was originally just a group of people who studied education within applied linguistics. We worked in the perspective of critical education, having some background on Freire and working with authors such as Kinchelo, McLaren, Giroux, and that was the background we had. Cecilia, who was the initiator, she was my supervisor. She took her doctoral degree in Virginia, and there she studied about collaborative research. At that time, in a critical perspective, she tried to work with the teachers on ways to improve the quality of their classes. And when she came back to Brazil, she started a group that worked with critical collaboration. And at that moment, it was in 1990, and Vygotsky was becoming an important author in Brazil in education and psychology, but she was in linguistics, although she had a doctoral degree in education in the States. When she came here with this idea of collaboration, of collaborative research, and she got in touch with this amazing, enthusiastic view of Vygotsky that was being born, she connected the ideas of critical collaboration and Vygotsky, the idea of mediation. Because for us linguists, the concept of mediation from the social cultural perspective was very important at that time. It was the concept because we were working with language and meaning. And so interaction was, we did a lot of discourse analysis, which was based on the analysis of interaction, the analysis of conversations. And so it was very good to have this background on Vygotsky because it illuminated what we were analyzing in terms of discourse. And we could make sense of that. So when I started my master in 91, Cecilia, we call her Cisa, she had a small group of students. She had just finished her doctoral degree and started teaching. And we wanted to do things that worked collaboratively with the teachers, the students, the school, whoever it was. And we started working with Vygotsky. I remember that I came from Rio. I'm from Rio de Janeiro. And I moved to São Paulo and started my master there at PUC. And the first class was read Mind in Society from one week to the other, the complete book, the whole book, and we are going to analyze. I had never heard about Vygotsky in my life. It was not something that we studied in Rio at all. So when I started reading, wow, this is interesting, but I liked it because it gave me ideas on how to teach, and that was it. But we started studying and trying to understand the concept of zone of proximal development and mediation and how language was connected to this. And from this moment on, we started working collaboratively. So because we had this idea that collaboration was essential, that mediation was essential, all the students she had became closer because nobody did it. First of all, we were called activists in terms of the kind of research we did, and it was like, what's that? That's not research. We're not doing
like
research.
In a very underestimating way, let's say, right?
Yeah, people criticize because at that moment here, ethnography with a very distant perspective, not interfering with the context, was the main thing, and we were doing research with the people, trying to change with the people. And because we had all these people against us, when we tried to publish, when we presented at conference, everybody was against us. So we became closer and more united, and more people were gathering, and we were growing as a group. So when I took my doctoral degree, we were already more accepted. And people were starting to think, well, perhaps this kind of research that interferes is not that bad. Perhaps it's something that can be good. And this connection with Vygotsky makes sense. And at that moment, Cecilia started working with people from the ISCRAT and the Social Cultural Society. And she met Broncard. I don't know if you know Jean-Paul Broncard from Switzerland, from Geneva, and he was a very strong researcher in the social cultural group, international group, and he worked with what we call interacionismo, socio-discursivo, so social discursive interactionism, which you put together Bakhtin, Vygotsky, and Habermas. So we started studying this. This for us was great because he also worked with language and studied language. And we started studying this, and we became a very strong group studying language in the sense of how it organizes activity, and how genres, which was the concept from Bakhtin, would embody these ways of creating meaning and so on. So we started with the word and the interactions, then we moved to the genre and the activities. But Habermas had that concept of communicative instrument and what's the other one?
Communicative action
and instrumental action. Yes. And we couldn't agree that there was this difference. We were, well, no, that's not possible. And at that time, by a totally different way, we got to know about Spinoza. Nothing to do with Vygotsky. It was because we read a book by a French author called, what's his name, Monica? We said it today.
Comte Sponville.
Yes,
Comte Sponville.
He's a Frenchman who talks about, he has different books on psychology and philosophy, and his perspective is completely based on Spinoza. And the way he wrote was so connected to the ideas that we had on Vygotsky and on all the discussions that we had, that we decided to start studying Spinoza. So we went to the books and we read the ethics and we studied that a lot to try to understand this inseparability of body and mind, body and soul, which was the basis of Habermas' communicative action and instrumental action. This division, this separation for us, which was so essential for the social discursive interaction and for us, didn't work. And that's when we met Harry Daniels. Harry Daniels introduced us to activity theory and to the ideas and the triangles and the activity system and all this stuff. And it made a lot of sense, mainly because Yuri tries to overcome this separation between sign and do. And for us, this is so good because in a multimodal perspective that we now have, we didn't have that at that time, but we now have. Everything is language in the sense of everything creates meaning, everything produces meaning. And so at that time we started studying activity. And for us, I remember once I was visiting Yuri and somebody asked, which Vygotsky or activity theory do you follow? And I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, the Russian, the American, the Finnish. I said, I follow the Brazilian from our group because we study everybody. We study whoever is talking about that. So we started searching for all kinds of things and we created study groups, and this made the group stronger because we were strong in the sense that we studied Spinoza, we studied Marx a lot. Marx we always did because of our political tradition, so this came with our histories. We were all involved with Marx in a sense. Then we started studying Spinoza as a group, and we started working with all these authors, the Russian ones in the book that I can't remember the name, organized by Lektorsky. That one was a challenge for us because the way they conceptualize activity there was amazing. Different from the way Leontiev does, Vygotsky does, because it was a way ahead of them. Also, we had at that time a very strong connection with Lois Haussmann and the ideas of play and Vygotsky, the revolutionary scientist. For us, in Brazil, it was translated into Portuguese. So everyone knew this book and everyone studied as the most revolutionary Vygotsky of all, because that normally Vygotsky here is read in this very pedagogical, not so strongly connected to changing the world. And that book would bring this idea of, well, let's use Vygotsky to change the world. And this is good. This is for us a very nice way of seeing. So that's how we became strong in terms of a group that studies. But Cecilia wanted to work with the schools to change schools as a whole. And that's when Monica enters, when I became a teacher as well at the university. Because Cisa said, we have to find a place for us to study, not only with one group of students, not with one teacher, with one person here and there. Let's get to one school and work with the whole school community, teachers, students, parents, the neighbors, everyone. And then we went to Carapicuíba. And in Carapicuíba, Andy, one day you may ask Harry Daniels about the trips to Carapicuíba in my car. Harry says that it was the craziest nightmare because we would go in this big car I had that we can have like 9 persons. I had at that time. We can have like 9 persons in the car, and we put like 11, 12, and we would go the whole group to do teacher education in the schools in Carapicuíba. Part of the group didn't fit in the car, so they went by train. And then I left the part of the group in the car in the school. Then I went to the train station, picked the ones who went by train, took to the schools. Then I took back them to the train station. But this movement of going there, coming back, and working with the schools, with the whole schools, we had to have a lot of meetings to prepare those meetings there in the schools. We had to be studying all the time together, and we became very connected. We became friends. That was when theory and practice became praxis, really, because everything we knew, everything we studied, came from the realities we were living, and they were very difficult realities. And even the students I started having after that came from the schools where we were working. So it became like a movement, and then the group started. From there on, we had many different activities and different projects, and all of them, every moment you come to this group, you will see new faces and old faces. So there are people like Monica that is here for more than 20 years, and there are people who just came, and they are as involved as those who are here for all this year. And some people stay away because of different circumstances, then they come back. And we are a very huge group with different activities and always acting politically, socially, and theoretically in all different stances. We are all together. That's why we can do so many things, as you could see in our Facebook page, because it's a big group, very engaged with changing society. We are not engaged with Vygotsky. Vygotsky is our support. But so is Freire, so is Marx, and so many other writers. So that's what creates the group that we have. And we are very enthusiastic. That's also another important thing. Monica, sorry.
It's abundantly clear. Enthusiasm of the group. It's wonderful you're answering sort of all my questions just in the course of your outpouring about your work in Brazil.
I told her, before we started.
But Monica, could you
the beginning of your
tell us about some of the ways in which chat has and Vygotsky have given you particular insights in your activism work? Maybe some anecdotes that will make this clear for people.
Well, my work with Fernanda's is bounded. I actually, it's like the tea. I have one of the tips, you know, she's the iceberg and I am just one of the tips because I have been involved in different projects. So, but I think the strongest concept we've been working together, and that is like this, if we think of the historicity of the whole theoretical background for the group, is the notion of the creative chains of activity. The idea that when Fernanda was telling that Cissa, Maria Cecília Camargo Magalhães, she didn't want to, she was like to study not the classrooms anymore, not only the relation teacher-student or student-teacher, whole the totality, let's say, of this. We started working with teachers, and then with Harry Daniels teaching supporting groups, we started working with teachers and then educational managers, pedagogical coordinators, as we call here at schools, or principals. And then we expanded from pedagogical coordinators, principals, then people who are involved in the boards of education. And then Fernanda started working with people from the boards of education and then secretariats of education. So in this project specifically, that's the one I mentioned, which is the management in creative chains, there was the whole educational system involved. So you see, every time I talk about a concept, I talk about the practice because it's embedded to us. That's the monism that Fernanda talks about. And at the same time, the dialectics. So it was not only one activity system nor a network of activity systems. It was multiple networks of activity systems interconnected. So I think that's not the huge, but it's a very big step for us as a research group, not only to study mediation anymore, which is very important, but to look as development and the formative interventions, because when Fernanda talks about the first work of CISA, it's already the seed for us on formative interventions. That we just didn't call it formative interventions, but it was already formative interventions, right? So it's not, we don't think about a unity anymore or a piece anymore. We think about bonds that are tight, interconnected. So when we think of collision of activity, right, the creative chains of activity, I think the first paper was in 2006, right, Fernanda? That's the first time you talked about the creative chain of activities, right?
That's when I went to Russia to that 110th anniversary of Vygotsky, and there was this conference in Moscow, and I presented about the creative chain. That was the first time.
Yeah, I think so that was I think, yeah. And then that was the theoretical paper that was connected then to the formative intervention that we started developing in 2000. Actually, it was 2007 when the whole work, this whole work started. It wasn't official, but we are already doing this management in creative chains. Just it didn't have this name, but it was already like the seeds again for the project. So that's basically, I think that's what I've been most involved in the group. As Fernanda said, there are many people in the group, and people are engaged in different types of research, formative interventions, yes, but different types of research and different theoretical choices also regarding chat, right? So my choice was to discuss many topics, but the main topic is the creative chains of activity.
Fernanda, could you address yourself directly to political people and activists and tell us, what would you say to them as someone that's developed a kind of activism based on activity theory and Vygotsky? What can you advise or teach the different political activists and tendencies that are active in Brazil at the moment? What advice would you give them?
Well, actually, Andy, that's not a hypothetical thing, because I am in the board of a congressman here in Brazil. He's a friend of mine, and I am one of his advisors. So we've been working with different concepts of activity theory within the organization of the political activities that he has. So what we try to do, first of all, is we have to educate the society, again, mainly the poor communities, the impoverished communities, because what happened in Brazil was people thought that improving the quality or the material quality of life of people was enough, but they didn't work with the general idea of the person as a whole. They only thought about providing them food, but that's not enough. They didn't provide them with the necessary education, cultural background, and possibilities to create. So what we've been doing now is organizing our political activities within systems. Of course, I don't talk about activity system there, but that's what we are doing. We are organizing different creative chains, we may say, in order to get people involved. So in our political group, we discuss some actions. Then we move to what activities are we going to do with the people in small communities who are already involved with these more, let's say, for more social justice engaged communities. And then we move to how are we going to engage the students, the young people, the people who are suffering in these invasions or occupations, and people who are in indigenous communities. How do we create change to make sense of what we are living and how we are living? So the projects we have and the projects you see in our Facebook page, for example, sometimes you see lectures with famous and important people from abroad, famous people from Brazil, but you also see actions that are done with indigenous people, actions that are done with people, LGBT community. You also see teenagers interview, doing cultural activities like with Islam, with what's the other one that they love? I forgot. But anyway, with all these things that they like hip hop and all these
poetry
things.
War, something like that.
Yes, yeah. And by doing so, we create a community of change. That's what we want to do. We don't want people to change into what we want, but we want people to reflect about social justice and about what we call in an indigenous perspective, the bem viver, the good living. This idea from the indigenous people is very central to us. In recent times, we've been studying more about decolonization and decolonial perspectives with Walter Mignolo, Catherine Walsh, and other Brazilians and Latin American writers who talk and who have a very strong drive to see the world in a different perspective. It's like the map, the upside down map, which says that we don't have a north-south the way it is, the north, the good one, and the south, the bad, poor guy. No, we have to have a strong place in the world, and we have to see ourselves this way. So Vygotsky and chat, which we prefer to say chat, because we believe that it's essential that we keep social, cultural, historical activity theory. For us, we can never forget that social and cultural, they may be seen together, they may be similar, they may be one in the other, but if we keep it, we will never forget that the relationships are essential, the context and the way it's organized, the idea of interculturality in the global south is very central, because we have all these issues with colonization, which made our cultural ideas horrible. So we have to see interculturality within social relations in history, in a historicity that creates possibilities for future. Of course, we have to study the past, but for me, historicity is essential for creating future. And in this sense, we see this connection very central for us. And when we act always like this. Just to give you a concrete example, as you asked Monica, we have now a project with a group of architects who are trying to study the problems of the city of São Paulo. They want to involve the whole community in deciding about the city, where to put money, what kinds of improvements to do, how to manage the city. And so we joined them, and we are doing a project on teacher education in order to prepare the teachers to work with the school community in order to teach them how to get involved with the community. And in order to do so, we act from the Vygotskyan, Freirean perspective of engaging in reality, that's Freire, but also Vygotsky with the idea of everyday concept. We generalize, or we do the double movement of Vygotsky. We use scientific knowledge, and we use what Freire said to come from the concrete reality to a general idea understanding reality in a historical way, and then we do what Freire calls the insertion in reality. That means the transformation. That's also what Vygotsky says when he said the real concept. We create the real concept, the concept that is going to be our instrument to change reality. And that's how we are working with the teachers, so that they can work with the students, so that we can change the way people manage the city. We become part of the management of the whole city. And that's a very nice project we've been working with. And we have regular meetings with the teachers, with these architects, and with the community. So that's the kind of thing that we do.
Now, Monica mentioned this term formative intervention, and I know everything you've been talking about has been around formative interventions, but this may be an unusual phrase for a lot of people, so could you explain more precisely what is meant by a formative intervention, and how you, as not only a part of activism, but as a research mode?
It's like we would say that we are doing research in the making. We use as Fernanda said in the beginning, we use all the theoretical concepts, but we don't name them all the time with people in general, people who are not related to academy or to research. But we use the notions of activities, the activity system, or mediation, or the interrelation between concept, sense, and meaning, and we take it to the field and we work with them in the field, and the idea is to transform a certain reality. And just before starting the meeting, we were talking about it, because the notion of transformation, this has been central to us in the research group and also in other research groups, but that who work with formative interventions, but the idea of transformation, right? And at the same time, transformation has been taken this other way round when we think about Bolsonaro's attitudes and all the extreme right wings parties all over the world, not only in Brazil, but in other countries as well. So we've been very careful with this notion of transformation, but it still is the main focus when we think of formative intervention. So it's not only to go to the field and do any kind of intervention, but we've been working with the notions of activity theory, and we consider the community needs or the field needs in order to transform and not only give things, right, give the tools, but build them with the communities, with the places, let's say, not the places, people from the places, right?
Could I ask you a particular question? It's a common problem that projects will be run in a poor community. A government or a university or an NGO allocates some money and employs a worker to go in and do some work. Typically, these go for 1 year, maybe maximum 3 years, and then the money is finished and the worker goes home off to something else, and the project falls in a heap. And the result really is growing cynicism by the local community, because they see people come in and go out and there's nothing left at the end. How do you address this problem?
First of all, it's very important to consider that we don't have funding.
That's the good part. Because we don't have funding, this is not a problem. We are all volunteers.
It's very rare. We don't have funding. Some people can get funding for their studies. I have to say that's a very small funding. But there is no funding for the projects. There is no project funding. Like we have academies around the globe that support projects. We don't have such a thing in Brazil. So,
but still, there will be yourself, maybe
there is a time frame,
PhD candidate or professor, and you at some point go on to some other work.
As we work in collaboration, and that's one of the principles of critical collaboration, critical collaborative research. all the stakeholders are engaged in the process, so that when researchers, no matter if it takes 2 or 5 or 10 years, no matter if how long we take, the stakeholders are working together in the process. So they are aware of every step of the process, so they can handle the activity, no matter the researcher. And some many times the stakeholders become the practitioners, they become researchers. So our research group is also constituted by lots of people with whom we worked with in the research projects. It's very interesting. We used to have an extension course at the Catholic University, and then some of them used to be my students or involved in projects which I was like leading somehow. And then they became researchers, PhD candidates, master's students. So that's how I think that's another movement of the creative change, right? And this whole expansion process, how people get together. You know, Vanur talks about this togetherness and how this togetherness makes the whole process moves.
Perhaps, Fernanda, you could riff a bit on some examples, some particularly interesting or important projects which have in that way continued.
Yeah, well, actually, let me say something about the project that Monica started working with, the one in Carapicuíba. We stayed there for what, like 5 years? We were there.
Let me just contextualize what Carapicuíba is.
It's the poorest city in the country. At the time we were there, and they had the lowest levels of educational results in the evaluations in the country. And lots
of starvation, precarious living conditions, housing conditions, sewage conditions. There were not many kids, but there were kids involved in drug dealing. So
one of the projects we had, now that you mentioned that, I remember, one of the projects was we worked with 3 teachers from one school, and we worked with, they brought to us the situation that 2 students died. They were burnt in their houses because they have these energy connections, I don't know, which are not properly done because they cannot pay for the energy supply. And then we started a project on reading and writing about energy supply. And we worked with cartoons. We worked with 3 teachers, a mathematics teacher, a language teacher, and I think science teacher. And they took this project on energy to the school and created a whole community movement on how, first of all, the importance of paying bills and how bills are paid, how we can save energy, how you can do a very good connection if you are not able to pay, teaching them how to do it properly, and all different types of things connected to the energy supply. And they invited the neighborhood, the community, to come to the school to learn all these things with the students. And I visited. And when I was there, a very young girl was teaching me exactly what we had worked with that teacher who was not her teacher. So you see, that's the creative change. I was there learning from a student who learned from a teacher who learned from another teacher who learned from us. And we are all connected. So when we do this, we have this chain of development, and people are not dependent on us. They learn not something, they learn a process. That's what we want them to understand. Not if they are talking about energy or if they are talking about rape, because in one of the schools, the problem was students didn't know the difference between sexual relationship and rape. And so the they had violent sex. And we worked with this with the teachers, and the teachers took it to the students, and the students gave workshops to the parents on the difference between rape and a good, healthy, enjoyable sexual relationship. So that's the kind of thing we do. And so these teachers who used to work with us in this project, many of them, as Monica says, took their master, took their doctoral degrees, they became supervised, they became teacher educators. So when we left, we didn't leave because we didn't have money to go there. Actually, we left because the governor of São Paulo at that time created a new policy for teacher education that prevented us from meeting with teachers because they could not leave their classes. Once a month. They couldn't leave once a month. And so we couldn't meet them. So we had to find other ways of acting. And we did in other different contexts. So we always do activities responding to the demands that come to us. We invent things. I love to invent things. But whatever we invent is based on the demand. So this thing about the city, the architects, and education. Another one that we are working with now is teachers at the frontier of Brazil. Not even in São Paulo. It's in Foz do Iguaçu. How do you teach teachers to work with indigenous people, Paraguayan people, Argentinian people, Brazilian people who come to schools all together and they don't speak the same language. The teacher can't understand all the language. How do you teach in this context? This is something that we are working with as well.
Some people say that nowadays people can imagine the end of the world, but they can't imagine a better world. How do you deal with how do you see imagination? Can people in the poor areas of Sao Paulo, can they imagine a better world? And do you tackle that as an issue?
Perhaps that's the worst question you could ask me, because once when we were in Carapicuíba, I was there, we were entering the school. And then the principals didn't know what to do with us there. They said, what do you want to do? You don't want to come and teach us what to do, so what do you want? And so they left me at a room, and then they came with a student and said, this guy can't learn how to read or write, so I'll leave him here with you. And I was there alone in the library of the school with this guy who was like 11 years old and couldn't read. And I started talking to this boy, and I asked a lot of questions, what he did in his life, what were his favorite activities, and then I asked him what he dreamed about, and he asked me, can I dream? So that was, in my life, the worst question I ever got. Because I have seen and heard, and I come from a community, Monica and we come from poor communities as well, very poor, deprived communities, and we've seen a lot. I've seen a lot in my life, but I never saw a kid who couldn't dream. He asked permission to dream, and that's why our projects now are so much connected to the idea of play, because we have to imagine. I remember when I started as an English teacher, and we would teach English to poor people, and they would say, why would you teach English to poor people? They would never have a chance to use it. And I said, if my mother thought like this, I wouldn't speak English today, because I was a poor kid who would never have a chance to travel abroad, to meet foreign people. From where I came, people didn't even finish school. Who can imagine a person going to the university or anything? So yes, we have to imagine the future. We have to imagine a different society, a different reality. We have to play with possibilities, because one of the things that I like most in Spinoza is when he says, you cannot want what you don't know. So you only desire what you know. You don't desire what you don't know because you don't know. So my philosophy is, let's present a huge amount of things to people so that they can desire a lot of things and they can choose what they want. I don't want to teach one thing or this thing. We teach a lot of things, different perspectives, different possibilities, so that they can make their own choices. And that is the idea of freedom that comes from Spinoza. And for me, this is the essence of living. Knowing so you can choose, choosing so you can be who you are. A very specific and unique person. Nobody else is like you. So let's create possibilities for people to imagine, but for you to imagine, you have to get to know things. So we play, but we play with a lot of different possibilities. That's why we like the concept of interculturality, that is presenting different perspectives of, or what Boaventura calls an ecology of knowledge. It means you don't know this as a glass only. You know this as a glass with flowers. It's made of whatever it is. You can put flowers in it. You can put water. So you know this from different perspectives and possibilities of understanding. And then you choose how you're going to do, of course, we are going to show also, if you choose this, these are possible consequences. If you choose that, these are possible consequences. But the choice is yours.
I'm going to ask you another difficult question, Fernanda.
Now it's for Monica.
It'll be difficult for you because I want to ask you what you see as the principal blockages and difficulties ahead of you in developing your work in Brazil.
I see a lot of problems. Actually, people say, you are a very positivist person. No, I am a very negative person. I see the world as horrible. I think the world is horrible, but that's the world we have. So how can we make it better for us all? If we are together, I think that we can create something better than what it is. But when I look ahead, we don't have money, we don't have scholarships, we don't have a place to teach, we don't have a connection with the schools anymore because the students don't have internet. We only have no's. So how do we create a yes? That's the only option. We have to look at the horrible things and find the possibilities. Catherine Walsh talks about gretas. That's the, how do we say that, Monica? We use the word, I can't remember now. When there is a wall and then there is a crack on the wall. And through that crack, you see a flower coming. That's what we are doing. We are trying to find cracks in the wall.
Cohen, what's his name? The singer, Cohen. And he says that the crack is what lets the light in.
That's it. That's what she says. In a colonized society like ours, where poor people vote for Bolsonaro, people who suffer, LGBT community votes for Bolsonaro, the black people vote for Bolsonaro. I can only think about cracks. Because I'm not talking about the rich people who vote for Bolsonaro or who support this government. I'm talking about the poor one, the impoverished one, the ones who suffer what he does, and they still think that he's going to save them. So I can only think about the cracks in the wall. That's the only thing.
How do you see the possibility of Lula becoming president again?
I think it's great that we have Lula. If he's there, I will, oh my God, thank God. But that's not my choice. I think it's the only, now he's the only one who can win over Bolsonaro. But he's not my choice. I think we have new people, younger ones, people who have more, I don't know, more connections and a more open-minded. Lula is an old guy with old views. We need younger ones with more open-minded ways, thinking about feminism, thinking about LGBT community, and so on and so forth. These things, this concept, these concerns need to be part of the person who is going to rule the country. And I don't think that Lula has this as his major. But he's good for a moment when people are starving. So he is necessary. I just don't think that he is my utopic leader.
Now, we're getting near to the end of the interview, so each of you, is there something that has been unsaid, something you'd just like to add that we haven't touched on?
I'd like to bring, can I bring two works from the other research group? Is it okay for you?
Of course.
Yeah, from the working accident, because I think we've been talking about activism, and we've been doing I have the contact with both research groups, and the activisms are different. The needs are the same, but the activisms are different, if we can say so. First, it's by Professor Rodolfo Vilela and Idalberto Muniz, as I mentioned, and we've been as this studying activity theory there and the whole formative interventions. Fernanda, I think you have a lot to share there. And one of the works they have been developing, and they work very close to try to change policies. So one of the works are related to childhood work, child labor, or teenagers labor. And there is this big chain of jewelry in the countryside of São Paulo. And there was this case in which one of the kids involved in the work drank acid, and there was this whole issue about it, and the kids died because of acid, because they used to put like in a water bottle, because they were working with the jewelry and they had to work fast, and there was this, the kid didn't notice, and the kid drank it, and the company didn't want to assume responsibility over it, because they said they were outsourcing the work. So as the work was outsourced, they didn't have anything to do with it. So the whole change laboratory was organized as a way to make the company and the whole system, the whole production system, more aware, not only more aware to change, of course, but at least more aware of the damages they've been causing on the organization of the city, because there was this accident, but besides this accident, there were lots of kids working in very inappropriate conditions. This is one of the work. Fernanda was telling about choices, right? And then there is this other work by Professor Simone Diniz, and she works with women in labor. And Brazil is, I think Brazil is the #1 country in the world in C-sections. But the thing is, they are not always necessary. And women, we don't have power over our body, because most of the doctors want to make money because they schedule the C-sections, and then they have their whole agenda and the whole schedule is prepared. So they know how much they're going to get. It's very expensive to have C-section surgeries, and women are not aware of their bodies, and they don't know. And there is this whole psychological pressure that, okay, you have to do a C-section, otherwise you and your baby can be harmed. So there is this project, this change laboratory going on how to change the laws and the medical rules on how to conduct C-sections. And the one I have to say that I've been following closer and I like it a lot is by Luciana Morganti, I think it's her surname. I can check it later. And she works with kids from foster housing. Febem, Fernanda? Foster housing. Yes. They are kids. kids who committed different kinds of crimes, and the whole conditions they've been treated there, because it's supposed to be an educational place, but it's not always like that. So she's been conducting a change laboratory to change this whole idea of what kind of education are those places teaching, actually. So I think these are key other works from this other research group that I think should bring some light to this idea of activism and the whole change laboratory idea, because these ones are very specific on change laboratories.
Fernanda.
Yeah.
Well, I want to end with a more theoretical concern then, because I talk a lot about the activism and how it's connected, but I want to say something about the theoretical background. There are many, many things we've been studying, but one of them, which for me now is very central, is the concept of funds of Perejivani. It's a concept that we have created based on our demands. We read a lot about funds of knowledge, funds of identity, and all that was written about it. And we read a lot about Perejivani. We read a lot about repertoire in the sense that we use in linguistics, mainly in what we call multilingual studies. We also worked with the concept of mobility, and Antonietta Megali and I, we created this possibility of understanding what we are working with as funds of Perejivani. What is this funds of Perejivani that we are creating? We put together our linguistic background and this psychological educational one, and we created this concept that when we have a dramatic event, a very strong one, and we go through a process that really, we are really involved in it, we are really touched by it, we are very moved by it. We use different resources to go through this. Resources that we don't even know we have. And because we use this, we take possession of these, and they become part of who we are. And we understand and we create possibilities for this to become part of other situations where we are going to use this again in a more empowered way. So the concept of funds of Perejivani, which means that we are going to, it's a gesture, it's the way we press the button to connect, it's a feeling, it's a way of looking at Monica and getting support. It's whatever it is, all these resources, they become part of this, which in Portuguese is much more beautiful because we call it patrimônio de vivência or patrimônio vivencial. And patrimônio could be heritage, but heritage in English is so horrible. That's why we chose to say funds. But for us in Portuguese, patrimônio is much stronger, and vivência meaning of living. So it's this amount of history that we gather in ourselves while we are working with the other. So while we are here, I am creating and expanding this so that next time I have an interview or next time I'm with another person and I have to talk about my group, not only what happened here and all the things, all the challenges that you created for me, and I thank you for that, but also all the challenges that I had to prepare for before I came here to talk to you. All this expanded my funds of Perejivani, my patrimônio vivencial. And this is the concept that we are working with now. How can we expand students, teachers, coordinators, principals, funds of Perejivani? And not only for them to make choices in the sense of desiring things, but how can we understand how these choices can lead to what we call an engaged development, not any kind of development, because development, we see a lot of very important people who took engineering, law, education at the university, and they are voting for Bolsonaro. So what kind of, they are negationists. So what kind of development is this? So we want an engaged development. An engaged development is a development that leads to situations like the one that Monica exemplifies now. So this concept for us is very dear now, and we are working hard on how to expand and explain and develop both theoretically and pragmatically. And the articles we've been writing are very much focused on how to engage people in processes in order to develop the funds of Regivani.